Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. And Aaron, we've got a very special guest today. Who do you have for us?
Yes, we have a special guest today so we can talk a lot about the Philadelphia Eagles, and nobody knows the Philadelphia Eagles and the whole league, really, as well as our man Mike Tanier over at Bleacher Report, well known for his chapters in Football Outsiders Almanac. Hello, Mike. Welcome to the Off the Charts podcast.
Hello and greetings from the home of the world champion, Philadelphia Eagles. I have to keep saying that for the next several weeks because I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to be saying that.
I'm saying hello from the home of the world champion Boston Red Sox. What world championships do you have, Matt?
I'm from New York. None recently. We have a lot of Knicks misery these days.
As opposed to in the past when the Knicks let's talk about 1972 and Willis Reed a little bit.
Oh, yeah, the 50s were great, too, from what I understand. Hey, I'm a Duke fan, though. I went to Duke, so seeing my guys on TV the other night, it did look like we have the Golden State of college basketball this year, potentially. Ridiculous talent on the court. Everybody's talking about Zion, and I thought he was the second best one. So.
Clearly, the answer to this is we need a baseball game between the Duke basketball team and the Alabama football team to figure out who is the best college athlete team.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
I'd watch the heck out of that.
You know Tua would be the guy, right? I mean,
I want to see I want to see Nick Saban and Krzyzewski like coaching baseball, and they'll be like, "What is this? I just sit here." I set up a lineup and I just like lean back and spit tobacco for 2 hours. Both of them would be asleep by the fourth inning.
Yes, as long as we don't have to see them in Duke and Alabama baseball uniforms, I think that works well.
Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Let's talk Eagles. Mike, 4-4. What's going on?
A lot. Oh, it's almost like a one step forward, two steps back situation, and it's been that way for weeks. I mean, we just had the story today. Obviously, the Eagles signed Golden Tate, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for the fact that Golden Tate comes as another receiver for a team that's been very short on weapons. And then we got some what looked like great news early in the week where Darren Sproles was coming back. Like, oh, good, Darren Sproles, we need help in the backfield. We just kind of fixed some problems in the return game, but with like a dynamic return man. And he goes out, I guess it was Tuesday, and promptly re-aggravates his hamstring injury as a 35-year-old athlete is going to do. So he's out indefinitely. The kick returner that we were using before, the young man named Carter, he got picked up off of waivers because the team released him after they signed Golden Tate. They got a defensive tackle instead. So right off the bat on the offensive side of the ball, you have this kind of like spiraling problem where as soon as you solve one problem, two more problems open up. And that's before we go over to defense where a lot of the same things are happening, mostly due to injuries, but also due to inconsistent play as well.
I was going to ask about that because to me, the big thing is you wrote, I think, in a Bleacher Report thing about the Eagles' offense has been much better in recent weeks, right? They had the two Foles weeks, and then you had Wentz kind of getting his head back on straight. So last 4 weeks, the Eagles have gone from 28th to 13th in offensive DVOA, right? Wentz is playing much better, but the defense in the same time has gone from 7th to 23rd. So my question is, like, what's going on with the defense that while the offense got its act together a bit, the defense all of a sudden is struggling?
I think you start with the Rodney McLeod injury, which happened, I guess it was about week 4 or something like that, and that takes away your free safety, and there wasn't a lot of depth behind him, and they've been kind of rotating different guys in there. And the young man Maddox is pretty good, but he's not the same player. And then you see the number of times that the secondary gets burnt. And you say, well, that's part of it's a free safety. You lose a free safety. Not only that, makes it easier to expose Jalen Mills. When Ronald Darby does one of his gamble and guess situations, you don't have a safety valve behind him. There's also been injuries out of the secondary. So you're already losing McLeod. And then you have an injury to Sidney Jones. He's been in and out of the lineup, and he was kind of counted on to be a slot guy. Rasul Douglas has been healthy, but he also had some injuries along the way. He's been very inconsistent. He's like this odd man out in the secondary. So you're rotating guys like Nate Gary and McDougal and some of these other players in there. And I think defenses are finding a lot of soft spots out there. There's obviously been some just whiffs by Jalen Mills in particular. But there are weak links all over the place. There's all kind of ways to expose that. That's part of it. Then when you start looking at the screen game and you start looking at, I know Football Outsiders, the second level yards, I looked at them a couple weeks ago, open field and second level yards were really high. not a lot of speed at linebacker, and not exceptional tackling at linebacker and safety since McLeod's been gone. And that's created gash situations on runs and gash situations on screen passes.
Yeah, I think anybody would agree that last year the strength of the Eagles was more the D-line than the secondary, of course. Mm-hmm. And this year I think the same thing is true. It's just been different degrees and different, the ball bounces different ways also. You started off with the safeties, which I think is a really interesting point. According to our data, the Eagles play cover one second most of any of the coverages they play. They love to be single high. And so what we've seen with teams like this, like take Earl Thomas in Seattle, for example, is that he has an outsized effect on their defense when he's on and off the field. They've been doing pretty well without him this year, but if we've seen over the past couple of years, the on-off splits are crazy there. And it makes sense from a football perspective. If you're trying to play cover one, you're trying to play single high. If that guy has a lot of range, he's going to make your whole defense look a lot better. So that injury is certainly something that I look for. Other safety position, Malcolm Jenkins, I don't think he's missed a beat. You see the same thing there?
No, Malcolm Jenkins, yeah, but he's often either playing in the box or in the slot. And that's why they run that cover one all the time. Sometimes he'll be covering a slot receiver or a tight end who's a slot weapon. That'll be him in man coverage, or he's in the box playing as a run defender or as an underneath zone player. And that plays to him. I don't think he has the elite speed anymore. I haven't seen a lot of teams trying to match up in the past. Let's match up Odell Beckham against them. And I think the Eagles usually have an answer for that when it happens. But he can still cover a lot of your bigger slot guys, your slot tight end type guys. And that's where he goes in there. Okay, so you want him there and you want McLeod up high. You don't have McLeod up high. And so you're scrambling a little bit. And again, that range comes from that combination of speed and athleticism and awareness, because a lot of it comes from that route recognition. I don't think that's the same. Even with Maddox out there, who again made a couple big plays, is a pretty good little ball player. He doesn't give you that. And I would like to see more of an adjustment. A lot of times when Schwartz gives his press conference, he's like, well, this is kind of how we play. We do gamble and guess. We do want to try and get those turnovers. Sometimes we're vulnerable to a big play. Sometimes you don't notice it because the offense was putting up 34 points last year and they're putting up 21 points this year. That's all well and good. I think sometimes you say if we have vulnerability where we don't have our free safety, where Jalen Mills is mistake prone, where he has been bite and guess prone, you have to come up with a different adjustment. I haven't seen as much of that as I think I'd like to have seen.
So that's the point where I think you are really spot on. Jalen Mills has been having a rough season, I think, to say the least. We got some numbers on him. Of corners with at least 5 targets, he ranks 137th out of 147 yards per coverage snap. 1.96 yards. Yeah, not very good. Meanwhile, he's seen 4 times as many snaps as the aforementioned Rasul Douglas. And Rasul Douglas does really well in this statistic. Not a lot of sample, but 1/8 the amount of yards per coverage snap. Just 2.5 yards per coverage snap for Rasul Douglas. So you see that difference there, and I think it comes back to, like you're saying, Jalen Mills is a gambler. And when you play a lot of cover one, and when you lose that back-end free safety to bail you out all those times when you miss on your gambles and to make you feel all that more confident to take even more gambles, that's where I think we see a big difference, and he's really fallen off.
Yeah, and I think if you just look at the total number of targets, he's near the top of the league in targets. He might be number 1 in targets. I think he was 3 weeks ago. Darby was up there too. It's go after the outside guys, go after the outside guys. And Douglas, I was advocating for playing time before, and then they gave him some snaps. I think the numbers are fine. I think sometimes when you're looking at him, you're like on tape, like, are we sure he's in the right position there? There's some questions for that where maybe he got away from things because he had more snaps against like Bortles or whatever at this point. But you want to find a solution. And I think Darby's a heck of a player, and the risk-reward ratio for his gambles is reasonable. I think when Sidney Jones comes back, he's shown enough that he could be that guy. The question comes, what about Mills and what about the slot in Jones's absence? Because both of them have been questions. And right now, opponent's answer for that is fire it deep, fire it deep, fire it deep. Now, will the Cowboys be able to do that? I don't know, because that's not necessarily their strength is firing deep passes to the outside, to the numbers and the boundaries.
Well, it should be. I mean, hopefully that's what they were trying to do by getting Amari Cooper to open that up. So, I mean, if there was ever a game where Amari Cooper was going to play a big role in changing the Dallas offense, this should be it. You would figure. And he played, I think he showed some things that showed he was an upgrade in the Monday night game. But, yeah, you'd want to say – because did he beat Mills last year? He beat somebody very embarrassingly in the Christmas game. And it was Cooper, and he caught this very easy touchdown. It had to be Mills. So you're going to see that. You get that double move game on. And I think Cooper's still capable of running that route. Now, is Prescott going to do that? Is he going to be comfortable in making the throw?
Will the throw be accurate? We haven't seen a ton of that, but I think that's something Dallas will want to look for. Maybe off of play action because you can suck in Jenkins and do something and get some of the other defenders out of the equation within the framework of the way they would do things on offense.
I think we all look at this division, and is this just a sort of waiting for Philadelphia to wake up and turn into the team from last year? Because Washington has all these injuries now,
right.
And Dallas looks like a mess, and we keep waiting for Philadelphia. Like, Philadelphia should take this. We keep feeling like they should take this, but running playoff odd stuff this week, it's really important that Washington has the one-game lead.
Right.
And that they have an easier schedule the rest of the way. That game against the Rams is a really tough one for the Eagles to have on their schedule. And I will say the important games are going to be against Washington. I looked at the simulation. If the Eagles can sweep Washington, their playoff odds go from like 30% to like 70%. So it's not enough to just split with Washington, because Washington has that one-game lead, and if the Eagles drop the game to the Rams, it's going to be even worse. They've got to sweep Washington. But I think as far as which is the best team, we all look at it subjectively and say, the Eagles should be better than they've been so far. I don't feel like Dallas and Washington are going to get better than they've been so far.
Yeah, and the Eagles, I think, do have that potential. But like I said, Washington's schedule is ridiculously easy coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, they play against the NFC East, like all of these teams.
Well, they don't play the Rams.
And they got both their Giants games ahead, don't they? I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, I saw you run that, and you said you took the injuries into account and you ran simulations, and it still came up with them on top.
Yes, and they have one Giants game still, but they still have the AFC South, a lot of that. So they still play Jacksonville and Tennessee, which are kind of like average teams. Mm-hmm. They play Tampa Bay this week, which should be a kind of easy game. The big games are going to be the two Eagles games, but the big difference between the schedules, Washington has more road games, but the big difference between the schedules is that the Eagles have the Saints and the Rams on their schedule, and Washington doesn't.
So first place schedule and whatever.
And both road games, by the way.
Right. No, big changes there. So you see what the benefit of the schedule is. You see what the benefit of already having that one-game lead is. One thing that I look at, Bill Parcells said, you are what your record says you are. But we all know about Pythagorean wins and how that's a thing in all sports. And your previous season Pythagorean win total is going to be more indicative of the following season than your previous year's win total. If we just look halfway through the season in terms of point differential for the NFC East, we see that the Redskins at 5-3 actually have a negative point differential, net -12. The Eagles are up at +22, and the Cowboys are at +3. So if anything there can be indicative over what to expect of the second part of the season. Not big differences between any of these teams, but different than what the records are.
Right. I think the Giants are almost going to cause some of those splits as they go through the season, because I think a lot of the Eagles' differential there is that plus-minus win. But I guess one of the things, Washington has a win over the Panthers already, and the Eagles have a loss. And one of the things that's happened is that these head-to-head close ball games, while they might not be indicative of how good the team really is, it's going to define how the playoffs shake out. And that comes down to some of the situational football problems that the Eagles have had, that they've had a lot of their gaffes have come in the fourth quarter, both on offense and defense. Their turnovers that have killed them have come in the fourth quarter on offense and defense. Their mistakes, and including things like screen passes that have gone for big yardage, a lot of those have come in the second half. And those are the things that you look for them to clean up, and I think they can be cleaned up schematically to a degree, but cleaning them up personnel-wise, I think one thing you notice is, Washington, we can point to the offensive line injuries and say that's where the injuries are. And sometimes with other teams, you can say, well, this is where the issue is. The Eagles have layered the injuries all over the roster, and at different times they've popped up at different times. You start the season not only with your quarterback out, but with Alshon Jeffrey out and with Sproles out, and now you have Lane Johnson who's playing through injuries and Peters who's playing through injuries, and you lose Derek Barnett. So at no point along the way you say, oh, these are the 49ers, they're toasted. Or this is Washington. Look at that game where three guys got hurt at once. But it's always a situation where you're never quite at peak performance. And each time along the way, what's been critical is they haven't had an answer. Oh, this injury problem has hit us. We don't have an answer for it right now. And that's been the difference that's been between a 4-4 team or a team that has a win against the Titans or against the Panthers and is at 5-3 or 6-2.
You mentioned so many good players there that have been hit by the injury bug this year. And you mentioned Darren Sproles earlier. And, man, I think that one hurts because him coming back there I think would create a different outlook for the rest of the season. the Golden Tate trade can help. He can be kind of a ball possession type receiver, that Jarvis Landry type mold, get him the ball and use him like a running back. But at the end of the day, having a real runner, I'm not in the running backs don't matter camp. So I think having that guy there would be helpful.
Well, I think this is a good example of it because you put Wendell Smallwood back there because you already lost Jay and you didn't have Sproles. And okay, Sproles will put up reasonable numbers, but if you look at the box numbers, there's not a lot of defenders in the box. If you look up the matchup situations, he can't do anything that, if you split him wide, he's going to adjust, the defense is going to adjust. You don't get a lot of those. So he's certainly like this replacement level ball player who gives you like the yards that are available to you and can run those things. But you lose a big player or two, you lose a matchup change or two, and that becomes an issue. And then when you go to the bench, you don't have that guy on the bench as well. I mean, Clement's decent. He's been playing through injuries. So you don't go, here comes Darren Sproles off the bench. You get this different matchup. So you get down to this is what replacement level looks like at the backfield. It doesn't kill you on the stat sheet because, he gets some 4-yard runs. He gets a screen pass. He runs for 60 because there's a defensive lapse and it looks great. But all those little places, all those nooks and crannies in the offense, you're not filling them anymore. Then you piggyback that onto this issue, that issue, and it becomes something that just nerfs your offense to a degree.
All right, one more thing before we move on. I've got to ask you, we both weighed in on our opinion of the Golden Tate trade. What was your opinion of that trade, the third-round pick to get him back? What do you expect in production-wise there? And was this a good move?
Well, we're here in the analytics camp, and you get a guy who catches 90 passes a year for 1,000 yards a year, and you see a third-round pick in exchange, and we start thinking, oh, my God, that third-round pick, that could turn into this, turn into that, et cetera. Sometimes you need a guy. Sometimes you need a player and a player who has a proven record of productivity, especially if your goal is to try to repeat this year, which is where the Eagles were. Now, I was concerned about the type of player because I think what the Eagles need is a vertical guy. Wallace, again, he's another guy with an injury. Matt Collins, another guy with an injury. I think we're starting to see them working out on the sidelines, and you don't get one of those guys. I know they were looking for Robbie Anderson that would have been maybe a more natural fit there. So, but you get a productive guy. And my question now is, okay, him and Aguilar, how do you split those roles? How do you split those reps? You've got two almost slot specialist guys. You can add a third slot specialist guys in Jordan Matthews if you still think he's anybody with a role. How do you answer that problem? I know how the Patriots answer that problem. They have Josh Gordon on one side, and they put Gronk out on the other side. And they work the slots constantly. Can you do that with Alshon Jeffrey and Zach Ertz? You can work some packages out. You can stick a Goddard out there. You can do things like that. I mean, I think it helps, but I was hoping as a fan for the Eagles to either get a corner, which they don't exist in the trade market, either get a corner or get that speed vertical wide receiver. But guess what? Unless it was Deshaun Jackson or Anderson, who was an injury case anyway, that guy probably wasn't coming as well.
The good news here is that as long as the Eagles are not expecting to be super active in free agency this year, they're going to end up getting a third or a fourth back for Golden Tate. Essentially, all they did was push the draft pick for Golden Tate maybe down around and off a year. But if they're not going to be super active in free agency, they are going to get a draft pick for him that sort of replaces the one that they traded away.
Yeah, and they have an extra second rounder next year from one of the trades. And they're not. You look at the cap. They're not going to be active in free agency because this is a team that's going to be trying to preserve what they've got for one more year. So, yeah, it is. It's like the rental deal. You rent a player for a pick exchange. I know Ross Tucker wrote a thing about the compensatory pick system and what that's doing to player salaries and the end of player contracts. Different conversation, but it's a logical move. It's a good move. Sometimes you have to hit your window. Right now, the Eagles are still in a championship window, and you got to get a guy who can help you, even if it means getting rid of a pick that you could use.
As long as we're talking about player movement and NFC contenders, I should ask you guys what you think about Dez Bryant coming back to the league finally with the New Orleans Saints.
Well, here's an example of a guy, when you first look at him and say, yeah, he lost a step, he's many years old, and then you look at the Saints offense and you realize they haven't had a number 2 receiver this year. Yeah, Ted Ginn has, I believe, like 12 catches, and he's averaging like 11 yards a catch. And he's Ted Ginn. He's going to he's going to take the
done. He's out for the year.
He's out for the year.
He's out for the year, and now Meredith's out for the year. Or Meredith, I think, is having ACL surgery or something.
Yeah, he's out. He's done. He's done for the year too.
Right. So you go from guy to guy. You don't have those guys out there. So you simply introduce this player. Now, like, what's his fit? What's his matchup? Well, how big a fit or a matchup do you have to be to say you're the number 2 receiver? You can be helpful on third down, helpful in the red zone, and you're going to be covered by the number 2 cornerback most of the time, and you're going to have coverage roll the other way. I think it's a good pickup. You can run the stats of DVOA for me and tell me where the Saints offense is. there's always room for improvement. This is a team that wants to be able to beat the Rams again. They want to be able to beat the Patriots or the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. One more body, I think, is a heck of a move.
If you're expecting Dez Bryant to be Dez Bryant that he was 4 years ago, you are sadly mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right in that at a cheap, he's coming kind of, I think, for under $1 million.
Right.
And for just to be the number 2 possession receiver, sort of the old Marcus Colston role, but not quite as prominent.
Right.
You got to figure Sean Payton is going to manufacture ways that Bryant will have the ball that aren't going to be so contested. So his catch rate probably won't be as bad as it was in Dallas, where even in Dak Prescott's really good year, Bryant had a low catch rate. So at first I was really hesitant about this move, but then when I saw how much they paid, and then when Meredith went on IR, I'm like, all right, I see it now.
Yeah. For me, they're paying nothing, so I think there's very much risk here at all. But the reasons why it does make sense, I think there are a bunch of them. Number one, this is a receiver that's been really good whenever he's had a really accurate quarterback like Tony Romo. Dak Prescott's never been that guy, and he's never been the same since Dak became the quarterback. That also has to do with his losing some athleticism, of course.
Right.
But I think there's something to be said for the type of accuracy. Marcus Colston was never the type of athlete that Dez was. Dez is still probably a better athlete than Colston was. Not as big a body, not quite the catch radius maybe, but has a lot of the same things to offer. And yeah, the depth chart in New Orleans, when you look at the injuries, Ted Ginn, Tommy Lee Lewis, Cam Meredith, even the tight end, Humana Nui, however you say that name, all kinds of injuries, and they're running out of players. Traquan Smith is a speed guy that can complement Michael Thomas, who can play anywhere. So it makes a lot of sense to me that they would want one of these big body targets, kind of Breeze can throw him open, low risk, high reward. And Sean Payton, remember, came from Dallas, so I don't think there's going to be a big learning curve here for Dez to learn the X in this system. I think it's the same role that he knows. And this team shaping up, expect Kamara and Ingram to be a big part of the passing game. Expect Ben Watson to be a big part of the passing game. Mike Thomas is still a catch rate over 90%. This could be just a nice extra body to get in there. I think I'm on the same page as you guys here. All right, let's do a quick round the league and look back at the games that we identified as the most important games last week. First one up was Pittsburgh at Baltimore. The Steelers win, but Le'Veon Bell is coming back. What do we make of this whole situation in Pittsburgh?
First of all, I'll believe that he's coming back when I actually see him on the field. Weird tweets where he tweets upside down. Don't tell me that he's on the field. And I mean, again, Connor's been really good. We think that Le'Veon Bell will add with the passing game, but it's going to be interesting to see if he does come back, how much they still use Connor. But this win was really important because it really put space between them and Baltimore. That 5-2-1 versus 4-5 is a big gap, and it really solidified Pittsburgh as favorites in that division.
And it demonstrates that Baltimore, that hot start, that thing, they're like, oh, their offense has been repaired by the arrivals of Crabtree and Brown and Snead. That was a ticking clock that ran out. This is the old Joe Flacco offense. This is the Marty Morningweg offense. It's always 2nd and 10, and then it's always 3rd and 9 because of the way they do things there. They're starting to talk about bringing Lamar Jackson in and things like that. But I think what they're really starting to do is realize that this isn't the season that's going to happen, that they have to make changes. So you kind of expose the Ravens in that game. The Bengals are now without A.J. Green for a while, I believe. So that's going to hurt them. They already lost Eifert. They're in their place. So this puts the Steelers in a position where whatever happens with Le'Veon Bell, they're in the position to do what they need to do to get into the playoff conversation, start talking about home field and bye weeks and things like that. They're very close to getting there. A Thursday night game against the Panthers is going to indicate one way or the other exactly how far they are along in that regard.
All right, moving forward, another game where we see a team take control of their division. Green Bay at New England. The Patriots continue the win streak. That's your guys over there, Aaron. On the other side, Green Bay and Mike McCarthy on the hot seat, unable to do anything even with the great Aaron Rodgers on his team. What were your takeaways from that game?
Well, so much of this was one play, right, where, I mean, the Packers, it was really two plays. First of all, the Packers were driving and they fumbled. And the Patriots scored on that next drive. And then the play that really was the insurance touchdown, the 55-yarder to Josh Gordon, where they kind of fell for a fake screen, but then basically it was one missed tackle. It was one missed tackle by Tramon Williams, and that was Gordon was gone. So I actually felt like the Patriots were struggling a little bit on offense until they got to that fourth quarter and they had those 2 touchdown drives. And Green Bay's defense was doing better than I thought. But then in the end of the game, you started seeing the weaknesses. They got pushed around on runs. They got, Tramon Williams was out of place because he's playing safety now instead of corner. You don't have HaHa Clinton-Dix on the back end. Look, there was a lot of the stuff. I kept saying all game, the slant is open, the slant is open, the slant is open. You could see the way that the Patriots were playing the Packers, that they could go for like 7 and 8 yard slants all the time. And they did it once. And that's all the criticism of Mike McCarthy in like one example.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot there. First of all, I don't know why 2 coordinators in, the Packers can't tell a safety from a cornerback. And it's always like, we got 3 guys playing out of position out there. It's like, why? Why don't you have these guys? And 2 weeks, I think that the Patriots were struggling on offense in particular. Because against the Bills, they were struggling on offense. I know it's a very good defense, but they were not sharp or crisp against them as well. And, particularly in this week, you talk about the fumble, you talk about the trick play, et cetera. It's an example of how the Patriots can win a game when Brady is not winning the game for them. Like, they're winning the game because some situational things, some trick plays, Cordarrelle Patterson, et cetera, good coaching. When's the last time you watched a Packers victory and said, oh, the Packers won that game even though Aaron Rodgers didn't play well? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Packers victories are Aaron Rodgers has played this well and he made this many big throws. That's the entirety of how they win games. And I think that's just the indictment in my head of what McCarthy does, that this team just completely rises and falls on. Not just is Rodgers playing well, but is he playing like at this sort of elevated GOAT level, because that's what they need.
Yeah, I was laughing to your point that somebody on the radio was saying, how come when the Packers win, it's all the credit to Rodgers, and when they lose, it's all Mike McCarthy needs to go? Well, because when they win, it's usually because Rodgers did something superhuman. That's why.
Right.
The scramble plays. It's the broken plays. It's the plays that are, that are not structured.
One more game we talked about, the most important game for the Super Bowl last week, of course, was the Rams at New Orleans. I'm curious to hear, Aaron, what does DVOA think of that NFC race?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is the Saints now have the tiebreaker, but the Rams still have a half-game lead. And we have the Saints lower than I think other people do. Even after this game, they moved up just to 7th in our ratings. The Rams are 2nd. This game actually was pretty close before you bring in the opponent adjustments. As you might expect, the offenses were both really good. The defenses were not in this game. And, I think you saw a lot of what happens to the Rams when Todd Gurley is not getting the space to run as much, because the Saints' run defense is really, really good. And they didn't shut him down per se, but they shut him down more than like he's usually shut down.
Right. The holes weren't there for him kind of by design. The Saints committed to stopping that sort of thing. And we saw a little bit of a different game than the Rams have been used to. I'll be interested to see over the second half of the season how that continues to develop. All right, guys, let's take a quick break for a quick message, and we'll be right back. The Off the Charts Football Podcast is sponsored by Draft. The daily fantasy sports website allows you to enjoy the most fun part of fantasy sports, the draft, on any day of the year. With Draft, you get all the excitement of a snake draft with anywhere from 2 to 12 participants, and then your players compete. That's it. No need for researching salaries, monitoring the waiver wire, or waiting for the entire season to play out. With Draft, you can participate in daily, weekly, or season-long contests. Draft is easy. The average draft takes under 10 minutes, and since you're competing with real people, Draft gives you a better chance to win than in many of the other leading DFS websites. You can compete in football, baseball, basketball, hockey, golf, and more, and Draft offers easy, immediate cash payouts to all winners. Simply go to our special offer website at draft.com/offthecharts and sign up to receive a free entry. That's draft.com/offthecharts. And one more final note. Please rate and like our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else. Please give us a like, leave a comment, and give us 5 stars. We'll be back next week with more. All right, and coming right back in, we have the most important games for playoff odds. Aaron, get us started with the first one.
Well, let's get back to the Eagles, because the most important game for playoff odds is Philly and Dallas. Dallas is basically out of it if they lose. 24% playoff odds with a win, 5% with a loss. Philadelphia is at 43% if they win, 18% with a loss. And I'll tell you what stood out to me looking at matchups here is the Dallas defense versus types of receivers, 27th versus quote-unquote other wide receivers, 26th against running backs in the passing game, and this is the really bad one against Philly, 25th against tight ends.
Well, and you see a little bit about, I think we saw a little bit about that on the Monday night game against the Titans. That is a really fast, that's a really aggressive, really assertive Cowboys defense. They do have a lot of talent there. Obviously, Tank Lawrence is a great player. And I'm confused about the Cowboys in that their offense runs about 500 screens a game, and they love the 3rd and 25 screen, and that's what their offense does. Their defense responds to every single screen pass, like it's like my dog when I pretend to throw the ball and I put it behind my back and the dog keeps running. And you saw that over and over again. And I think that's the backs. I think that's misdirection. I think that's some of the other things that the Cowboys defense, with their youth and maybe the way they're coached, don't necessarily respond pretty well to. And that's going to put them in a position to – I see that the Eagles are 7-point favorites. I'm kind of surprised by that. But you can see all the avenues of victory the Eagles do have.
And more youth because there's no Sean Lee, so you're going to get a lot of Leighton Vander Esch.
And Vander Esch is a good example of a guy. You can see him make these explosive flash plays, and then you can see him out of position sometimes.
Right. So what I'm looking at in this game is we talked before about how Philadelphia struggled in that cover 1 and cover 3 this year, those middle of field closed coverages. And coincidentally enough, that's what teams love to run against the Cowboys. As you can imagine, they're not keeping 2 safeties high very often against the Cowboys. They're challenging them. They're slamming the box. And with the middle of the field closed coverages, with those 1 high looks, cover 1 or cover 3, Dak has been really, really struggling this year. So he ranks 30th in EPA per attempt, -8 expected points added per 100 attempts, and 35th in positive play rate, just 40% across all throws against cover 1 and cover 3. So expect the Eagles to be sticking in that. Hopefully they can get it going a little bit better than they have over the most recent part of the season. But that figures to be one matchup that's going to be tough. And going back to that Amari Cooper deal, that's the thing that can really take the top off of it. Certainly a talented route runner. He runs routes as nice as you'll see in the NFL. He's got to catch the ball like he did in the first game, and he's got to be able to force the defense out of those single high looks.
Right, and the other thing about that is in the past, the way the Cowboys were so effective is you had Jason Witten work in the middle of the field, and then you would have Beasley work in the middle of the field when you had more legitimate outside threats, when you would have Dez on one side and the other side didn't matter so much. And Beasley's still – is Beasley the right name? Am I saying that right?
Yes, yep. Cole Beasley, yeah. And then you replace Witten with nothing. And I just look at how the Eagles used to cover that. And sometimes they would have Malcolm Jenkins on Witten. Sometimes they have Malcolm Jenkins on Beasley, which was often a mismatch because of the lateral quickness. And now you can dictate more against this team because you don't have to take seriously the tight end threat in any way. And that's where the play action passes came from. That's where so many things came from. When you get out of that, that allows the defense to do a lot more different things. Yeah, you can keep your 1 safety high. You can stay in base, which you couldn't really do. Like, you got to stay in base against Jason Witten in the running game, and Zeke's going to kill you, or Witten's going to beat your linebacker. Now you can stay in base. So many of those things that allow the defenses to dictate to Cowboys as opposed to the other way around. I think you're seeing that in the numbers.
Yeah, Witten was a big part of the passing game and the running game, and then also the injury of Travis Frederick up front and what that's meant for the offensive line just in general. That's where everything goes. John Shula said, show me a good offensive line, and I'll show you a good offense, and I think that it remains true. Eagles record a hurry or sack on 30% of dropbacks when they rush just 4. Prescott and the Cowboys, they allow pressure 33% of the time overall. This could be a lot of pressure for the Eagles D-line against that struggling Cowboys front.
Some of that is Prescott, by the way, because even when the Dallas offensive line was at its best, the Dallas always gave up more pass pressure than you would expect given the quality of their offensive line. I think some of that is just Prescott plays in a way that he brings pressure. He's not a get-rid-of-the-ball-quick guy. He's a try-to-make-things-happen-later-in-the-down guy, and he brings pressure upon himself.
Like we found in the past, pressures and sacks belong to the quarterback just as much as they belong to the offensive line. Sorry, Mike?
Yeah, you saw that on Monday night a lot. And, of course, he's a mobile guy. He can escape. He has a very slow trigger to escape, though. Yeah, I saw 3-man rushes against him. He's standing in, and there's a lane from the run. And a lot of times that's schematic. That's Lanahan or that's Garrett saying stay in the pocket, which isn't the best advice to give a young man like this when you don't have anything open. Yeah, you're better off running and making things happen. And against the Eagles, particularly both Mariota and Cam Newton were able to move around the pocket a little bit while the pass rush collapsed and then find something. That's what Prescott has to be able to do.
All right, let's move along and look at the next most important game of the week. Aaron, what do we have for that one?
Second most important game of the week, not one people probably are thinking about, but Green Bay and Miami. Green Bay is in 32% of the time with a win, 13% with a loss. And Miami still have, they're still 5-4. 57% of the time with a win, 32% of the time with a loss. I mean, Miami and Cincinnati right now are setting up for one of them to be the team that sneaks into the 6th seed and gets clobbered in the first round of the playoffs. And we saw that with Miami a couple of years ago, and they're kind of sticking around this year to possibly be that team this year.
And they got 2 Bills games coming up.
And they've got 2 Bills games coming up.
Right. Let's get them to 7, and then you can work your way up there. And I think the Dolphins are going to wind up being that team because I think they're healthier, and at some point they'll get Tannehill back. And I always look at Dolphins, particularly this year, and I say, what's the point of this team? When I see Brock Osweiler handing off to Frank Gore and throwing to Danny Amendola to get to 8-8 or 9-7, I wonder what the point of the Miami Dolphins.
The point is to get to 9-7.
Yeah.
Wow. I grew up a Dolphins fan. I still have family watch Dolphins games every Sundays and want to talk about it. And what's the point of this team really, really just hits close to home. What is the point of this team? I have no idea. If Tannehill was there, I think they'd largely be the same team. Yep. Brock Osweiler's been better than Brock Osweiler's been previous to this year, but still just really, really mediocre. What is he? He's 18th in expected points added per attempt at 5 expected points added per 100 attempts. You can't get much more mediocre than that, but it's a lot better than being 30th and 36th as he was the last couple of years. I think if Tannehill's in there, it's a lot of the same thing. Now we're having a weird issue with Rashad Jones having a disagreement, pulling himself out of the game and not coming back in after the 4th series. It's another one of these things like it was with Ajayi, like it was with Jarvis Landry.
Devontae Parker.
There's a lot of stuff like that going on, and it really makes you wonder, okay, even if things were kind of going a little bit more smoothly, what's the goal with this team exactly? What are they trying to build? I think that this is one that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it because the record is 5-4, but I think that the Dolphins could clean house in the offseason if they're not careful, especially if they don't wind up making the playoffs. And somebody that's thinking rationally takes a step back and looks around and says, wait a minute, we're not building anything really here.
Yeah, the worst thing that could happen to Miami would be to sneak into the playoffs at 9-7 and take that as a message that this is a good team, that they're building something.
They remind me of one of the – first of all, it's been 11 years that they've been wrapping around in circles. You go back to even Saban and those guys. They remind me of one of these 1970s teams where, getting to about 500 every year, there was not a lot of sense of urgency. There was not a lot of national media. And you're just putting guys out there to sell tickets every week that you would see like the Green Bay Packers and Detroit Lions in the 1970s. And they go like, back then it would be like 6-8 or whatever every single year. That's what the Dolphins remind me of right now. There's no forward momentum. There's no reverse momentum. There's no, we're going to tank and clean house. There's nothing. And what I think you'll see in the offseason is maybe Gase will go because they'll recognize, this is pretty obvious. This coach foments problems with even our valuable players. Maybe the general manager go, but the Dolphins are famous for half measures, firing one set of decision makers and not the other set of decision makers, so that they're always push-pull against each other every single offseason.
It's tough because I still think Gase is a good scheme guy, right? When you watch Miami, they get guys open, and they get guys for some really long yak plays, and there's a lot of scheming involved in that. I just wonder if Gase is a Peter Principle guy like Norv Turner, and the way, in some ways, people feel Wade Phillips might have been, like, just much better as a coordinator than a head coach because of the whole locker room management thing, because it really is a lot of players that there have been locker room management problems with.
The craziest thing to think about this team is if you look at the AFC East and you think, well, the Bills and the Jets, what a mess those two teams are right now. I think there's a pretty good argument that you'd rather be the Bills or the Jets than the Dolphins, and that should be scary for anybody in the aqua and orange.
No, that's it. Like, do you have any kind of propulsion forward or any kind of plan? Like, yeah, we got a rookie quarterback and we got cap space and we're going to do this. Fans nowadays are savvy to that. Like, that's better than, maybe we'll squeeze 500. And, I think some teams have to be aware that that's the perception now. And the Dolphins, I don't think, are savvy to that.
Yeah, I don't know if I like Buffalo's plan, which is
right.
An inferior version of the Carolina Panthers, but at least it's a plan.
Yeah, the Dolphins aren't playing Nate Peterman, so things could be worse.
Well, I'm thinking more of Josh Allen as sort of an inferior Cam Newton.
Yes. Off-brand.
Absolutely. All right, one more. Let's talk about the most important game for the Super Bowl this week. What do we have?
Well, the most important game for the Super Bowl is usually going to be with one of the top teams, given how far ahead of the rest of the league we have the Chiefs and the Rams. So it's the Rams and the Seahawks rematch in Los Angeles. The Rams go to the Super Bowl 44% of the time. They win this game, 36% if they lose. Seattle goes 4% if they win, 1.5% with a loss. First thing that stood out to me looking at matchups, Seattle 20th versus number one wide receivers, and there was no Brandon Cooks in the first meeting between these teams. So this is the first time that Brandon Cooks has faced the Seahawks this year.
If you haven't watched the Seahawks in a while, this is just a completely different team than what you saw in years past. This is not, obviously it's not the Legion of Boom back there. It's also not the Russell Wilson scramble around offense. It's this kind of like milquetoast on both sides of the ball. It's like they're kind of okay defensively. Their offensive line is kind of okay. They got the Brian Schottenheimer, clouded dust offense, but it's a little bit better than what we've seen in versions past. And so there's this sort of like baseline, just a notch above mediocrity team on both sides of the ball that says, are you going to beat yourself this week against us, or are you just inferior to us? And if you're superior to us, you should get a win, because there's a lot of different ways you can beat us. And that's kind of the goal for the Rams this week, is to go in and not do anything stupid, exploit the things that are available to you, and that should be it. And you should be able to beat this team.
It's funny because in the offseason, the Seahawks talked so much about how they were going to be a run-first offense, a run-first offense, a run-first offense. And they really haven't been, except in the first game against the Rams, because the Rams' defense is so set up to stop the pass. Seahawks ran for 190 yards in the first game between these teams. So the rushing yards should be there if they want them. I just don't know if grinding it out is the way to beat the Rams' offense, because, even if Seattle is gaining a lot of 5 and 6 yard chunks, there's going to be 2 and 3 yard chunks that puts you in third and long, and then it's like Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers and Ndamukong Suh pin their ears back. Dante Fowler's there now. Like, here, there's someone else who wasn't there in the first game, and here they come to get you.
So I read an interesting article earlier this week about the running back case for MVP that Todd Gurley has, and how James White actually has a better case for MVP than Todd Gurley. Malcolm Brown of the Rams has a higher expected points added per attempt, 11 per 100 carries, and positive play rate, 67%, than Todd Gurley, his teammate. 8 expected points added per 100 attempts and 48% positive play rate. But he's still not a better player than him just because he has better rate statistics. I think that this is something that can get really lost. I think there's a lot of good arguments to be made about kind of devaluing running backs compared to other positions. Like we talked about earlier, there are running backs available in the trade market. There are no corners available in the trade market. There is a reason for that. So I'm not trying to say that running back is the most important position, but there has to be more that we understand going on than to look at the stats of a player like a James White, or to look at Malcolm Brown versus Todd Gurley and say this is a better player because of the statistics. Because plainly that's not true. And to be really honest, if we're being honest with ourselves as analysts, we've got to say, if we look at a player that we know is obviously better than another player, and we look at the statistics and they tell us the opposite thing, yeah, maybe the statistics are pointing out something to us that we didn't realize, and we should be open to that. But also there's a chance that we're not gathering everything in that statistic. Statistics take the analog world and they put them into this digital form, and sometimes things get lost there. So I wanted to kind of get on my soapbox a little bit just for a second to defend Todd Gurley and say, no, actually, if we're going to give this to a running back, let's give it to Todd Gurley. Oh, and by the way, let's give it to Kamara and a few other guys before we start mentioning James White. Because last time I checked, the Patriots are lining up a wide receiver at running back to help make up for some of the skill that James White doesn't have.
Aaron and I have been doing this for 15 years. And after 15 years, if we're at the point where, like, analytic articles are like, hey, this guy who has a lot of bulk carries and a lot of bulk touches and a lot of bulk stats has worse rate statistics than the guy who's used less, which means there's more volatility in the data and also more examples where they might have been used in a specialized role, et cetera, et cetera. If we're at the point where we still have to have that argument, I don't know. Like this is like literally someone who likes analytics and understands analytics is saying, oh, James White or Brown are better because I just noticed that Gurley's rate stats, which are an accumulation of variety of situations, variety of usages, and just simply more bulk. We're at the Stratomatic card level here. Where like I have the Stratomatic card of this guy who had 10 at-bats and 4 hits, so he's Ted Williams because he's a 400 hitter. That's where we're at with that. I don't want to address that. I don't even want to dignify that level of reasoning. You're right, obviously, that somebody who has high rate stats off the bench or as a rotation player, it's worth looking at, exploring. But if we're at the stage in the argument of better, like this is better, Todd Gurley's not good. Aaron, we were like this back when we took over the prospectus years ago, where it's like, Ladainian Tomlinson is bad because he has a low yards per carry. That was the logic that we were trying to work against.
I think there's something to be said for volume, right? That's why in our total stats, we do comparison to replacement player rather than comparison to average.
Yes.
Because there's still something to be said for an average player who has a lot of volume, and Todd Gurley is far from an average player this year.
Right.
That's why in our numbers, he's so far ahead of the rest of the running backs in value, in rushing value, certainly. Now, the James White, the Malcolm Brown conversation is strictly about the variability of guys with small usage and rate stats.
Right.
The James White conversation is a little bit different, I think. And I think it's based on this. And you will rarely hear me quoting Pro Football Focus, but they have done some research that suggests that by far the greater value over replacement for running backs is based on their use in the passing game, not their use in the rushing game. That a lot of the difference in running backs in the running game is based on the volatility of 2 or 3 long carries. But what really matters for running backs is their abilities as receivers and their abilities as pass blockers. And with Gurley not having quite the same results as a receiver this year as he did last year, that's where I think the argument for James White comes in. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it when it comes to these 2 players specifically, because Gurley's a pretty good receiver too.
Right? Yeah, that's it. And he is used constantly to create mismatches. All those things you would say, well, this is somebody who is a modern running back as an all-purpose weapon. You see Gurley splitting wide, catching passes from going up the seam, doing things like that. So, if
right.
James White is like 15% better than Todd Gurley as a receiver, I was like, okay, that is interesting. I put Kamara as probably the same situation. And then you have like the whatever percentage point better that Todd Gurley is, and if you're going to come back to me and say, yeah, but look at White on this per carry basis when he's being replaced by Cordarrelle Patterson, where he's rotating with Sony Michael, it's just enough's already. Somebody who's making that statistical argument and doing it in the marketplace, I think we need to bring him in and we need to sit them down and we need to educate them, not say you're not. It's not a conversation. It's not a conversation to do that either-or thing and say that it's better. That's crazy town.
And I will point out that Gurley his rushing is not about just 2 or 3 big runs. He's number 1 in success rate. So it's consistent. It's consistent 5 and 6 yard carries. The question there becomes, how much do you distribute the responsibility for runs between the running back and the offensive line? And I think part of the argument is that a running back's performance in the receiving game is more his own thing, especially because running backs
So let me.
And passers do.
So I want to address that because I think there's 2 things here. One, I'm with Mike, which is I don't really want to have a conversation about James White versus Todd Gurley. It's just ridiculous.
It's insane.
The other part of it is, Aaron, you're right. So when you look at expected points added and you really start to break it down for passing versus running, almost all of your expected points added over the course of a season are created through the passing game. Whereas through the running game, it ends up being really close to 0 at the end of the day. You end up having some positive runs that create a little value, some runs that lose a little bit of value. But the choice to pass, because you're going to create more yards on average, is going to create more expected points for you than just running. So if we start with the premise that passing creates value and running doesn't create value, you can see how using that to put it behind your WAR model, which is what they do, and creating your WAR statistic based on that, you'll end up with quarterbacks and receivers being much more valuable than running backs. And that's totally legitimate. However, you're confusing that conversation with one about building the team and the skill of the players and how much impact they're having within their offense. And that's the part of taking the jump from, hey, passing's more valuable than running. We should take James White leads the league in targets for a running back. He's created a lot of value through the passing game. But, I mean, let's also remember that he's playing in the Patriots offense with Tom Brady as his quarterback and all this other stuff like this. It just it seems to me like to make this argument, you have to take some stances that are really interesting and then just ignore a whole lot of other things if you wanted to stand up.
I think it may be the difference between the question, who are the most valuable players in the league from an expected points added structure, and who's the best running back? Because expected points added wise, running may not have a lot of impact, but it's a really big part of the running back's job. And if we're going to judge who's the best running back, we should judge running backs based on the job they're asked to do. And running is still a large part of the job they're asked to do. And Gurley has been a much better runner this year.
And also, if the job you're asked to do is not be the starting running back because we decided Cordarrelle Patterson is better, I think that's a data point that has to be mentioned in having these conversations. Yeah, again, because you become like, oh, look at the left-handed pinch-hitting first baseman and look at his warp or whatever they use in baseball nowadays. Yeah, he's not starting. And he's not backing up Gurley or somebody like that. He's not starting behind rotation players and receivers. That's a data point that matters and that kind of eliminates you from the best player in the league conversation pretty obviously.
You know, it's like a lot of things when it comes to advanced analytics. It's if you take it to its far conclusion, it ends up sounding a little ridiculous. Yeah. But the basic lesson makes sense. The basic lesson of we overrate running backs as runners compared to the value of their offensive lines, but we underrate what they mean as receivers.
Right.
And passing is more important than rushing when it comes to football in general. These are good basic lessons.
Yes.
But the idea that it takes you to James White is a better running back than Todd Gurley, especially when Gurley is a valuable receiver, right? It's not like we're talking about Alfred Morris, okay? That I feel like is a little bit of a bridge too far. But the basic idea of it is something that's a valuable lesson and things that teams still need to learn. Teams still need to learn that passing, we are not yet at the optimum point of passing.
Right. All right. I think we're all on the same page there. And on that note, we will sign off. Mike, is there anything you're looking to plug before we get out of here?
Just telling everybody you can find me every week on Bleacher Report. Download the BR app right on your phone, absolutely free. All kind of content. Follow your favorite writers. Follow me, Mike Freeman, Matt Miller, you name it. Lots of people, Ty Dunn. Features. Follow your favorite teams. Incredibly customizable. You'll find me every Monday for Monday Morning Digest and a couple other times during the week with columns and features as well. And that's all I've got to plug. That isn't something that Aaron also plugs.
And Aaron, on that note, what do you have to plug?
Well, I just want to remind everybody again, to check out the premium products at Football Outsiders, powered by Sports Info Solutions. All this charting data like the cornerback stats and broken tackles, things like that, pressure rates is all there. $40 for a 1-year subscription, and that's 1 year. So it's not just to the end of this season. It gets you through halfway of next season. Or weekly fantasy projections for just $30. Same thing, 1 year. You'll get halfway through next season on that. Go to footballoutsiders.com/store.
Shout out to producer Justin. Shout out to our researchers, Bryce Rossler and Pat Rowley. And we'll see you next week.